And then a few years ago they found that they were just not able to keep up the payments to all these organisations. I know, because I was saying to them, why aren't you paying money to us? You haven't paid us for a couple of years, what's gone wrong? So we then, at our suggestion, did a cost-benefit study for them of the 25 international organisations they belong to. So we got some high-powered consultant, economist, and this person went through all these organisations. Literally, cost-benefit study. You belong to the UN, what's it costing you, what are you getting from it, etc. UNICEF, the Commonwealth, the Pacific Islands Forum, and so on. The result of that is they ended up by literally leaving a number of organisations that weren't really giving them any added value. And I always say to those that say, well, are we getting value? I say, well, that's up for you to measure. You measure yourself what you're getting from us. And if you're not convinced you're getting value from us as a member, fine, let's talk about it. So that's the position we find ourselves. As an organisation, yes, we have to fight for our place in the sun, but on the other hand, we're not competing against any other organisation specifically. There is always overlap, and there's always overlap amongst international organisations. But our niches in this area, we're not trying to supplant the UN, couldn't possibly do so in terms of their size. We're not trying to supplant regional organisations, they have a different role. We're not trying to supplant functional organisations, they have a more specific role. We've got to be able to say, this is the kind of area that we're working in, and this is how we can help and encourage our countries to stay actively involved. And to sort of develop that, let me go back a little bit, because it was in about the 1960s where we'd been around for a while. The Secretariat, of which I'm the Chief Executive, was set up in 1965. But 1971, leaders meeting in Singapore. Now, leaders meet every 2 years. Leaders meeting in Singapore said, isn't it time we actually told people what we stood for? Now, this was very much in response to apartheid South Africa. It was very much a concert of rumbles going on, that was then Rhodesia. It was designed to placate a number of people, but at the same time get everyone to say, yeah, we believe in this. In other words, as members of this organisation, these are the kind of things we believe in. And then that was refined in 1991 to a set of principles. And it was all about political and economic principles that no one can actually disagree with, but to adhere to them requires a bit of effort if you're not used to them. It's the straightforward, the free and fair elections, the independent judiciary and independent media, transparency of public accounts, plus the sort of a range of social and economic things, the entitlement to do this, the economic opportunities, actually much harder ones in developing country. You couldn't say you guarantee everybody a job, but you do try and say economic opportunity. So leaders refined those principles and said, this is what we should be all buying into. And this is always a good time to do it before you actually have a real problem. And then a real problem did occur. So that was 1991, those principles were established. 1995, when Commonwealth leaders were meeting in my country, in New Zealand, there was a military regime in Nigeria. The head of that regime was a fellow called General Abacha, and he decided just to execute 12 people for political reasons at night. Now, I don't think anyone could have had worse timing for an execution. Right at the time when all the heads of government meeting in New Zealand, when Nigeria was represented by a foreign minister there who had no idea what was going on at home. The result was leaders said, this is it. Nigeria, you have breached, violated Commonwealth principles, you are now suspended from the Commonwealth. And then they put in place a series of measures that determine whether or not a country can be suspended and whether or not a country can come back after suspension. And it is probably the most prominent thing that the Commonwealth has done in the post-apartheid years. And we remain the only international organisation on the planet that has a capacity to suspend a member country or even expel a member country if you do not think that country is up to standard. Now, I have chided other ones to try the same thing, and a couple of times I've spoken to the United Nations and said, you know, why should the United Nations, why should a leader who gained power, the barrel of a gun, come to the United Nations in New York and make a speech on behalf of the country where he or she has no mandate whatsoever? But it appears to be an issue that's just too much for most others to swallow. So we remain quite independent in that respect. But at the same time, it gives us a degree of moral authority which others do not have. And I think it's part of the reason also that it is pursued quite relentlessly. The consequence of that is that we have suspended not only Nigeria, we suspended Sierra Leone as a result of military dictatorship, we suspended Zimbabwe as a result of very, very poor elections, we suspended Fiji on a military coup, we suspended Pakistan on a military coup. Gambia went on the watch list because a military leader was not adhering to these sort of principles. And it did work. It worked from the point of view that the countries that were suspended, while saying for about 6 months, well, we don't care, it's of little interest to us, what's the Commonwealth sort of thing. After 6 months, all were prepared to start to talk and get back, and all came back into the Commonwealth, with the exception of Zimbabwe. President Mugabe decided that after one suspension and a renewal of that suspension, that he could no longer wish to be on the Commonwealth. In other words, he wasn't prepared to adhere to Commonwealth values. Now that was a loss to us because we don't like losing members like that. I'm the only Secretary General who's had a diminishing number of members in the total Commonwealth. But we can assume they will come back. President Mugabe has said the Commonwealth has got nothing to offer Zimbabwe, that's his view, but we still need many other Zimbabwe people who want to come back. Change in Zimbabwe will come from within sometime, though I wouldn't wish to put a date on the present time. The last time I saw President Mugabe, he was as fit as any person, probably 20 years younger than he at the present time. But that's another story. So having done that, having put ourselves in that position, lived up to it by virtue of being able to address issues where there was less than full support for democracy, we were able to work much harder in that area. Now that essentially has become the spectrum in which we do a lot of our work. It's all about building up governance and democratic institutions, supporting the ongoing growth of democracy. Because one thing we're absolutely sure of, and there's enough evidence around the planet, that if all those democratic institutions in your country are working, and when we talk about all of them, 5, 6, 7, 8 principal institutions, those are the countries that get the greatest amount of development. They are the countries that essentially grow faster than other countries, and World Bank statistics will show you that. So by linking our work in favour of democracy and democratic institutions, we're also able to show this is the way you're going to get development. 3 or 4 years